Thank you. There it is. Thank you. That is my website. Oh, not yet. That is my website, fisherandfry.com. That is the easiest way to get a hold of me. If you want to argue with me about something I said, feel free to go on there, hit contact. It will come right to my phone. I promise to write you back. I'm very, very good at responding. If you want one of the resources I talk about, go on that website, hit contact. I will respond and get you the PowerPoints or whatever else you need. I'm stalling so you'll write it down or take a picture of it. I'm going to start with my favorite sentence of ever I've written. The best sentence is my favorite sentence I've ever written in my entire life, and it says, every student deserves a great teacher, not by chance, but by design. And I would like you to choose a word or a phrase from my sentence. What word or phrase is speaking to you this morning as you left your family, your community, and you came here? What word or phrase is speaking to you, and why? And then would you turn to a partner and say, here's the word or the phrase that I'm thinking about, and here's why I'm thinking about that. Turn your heads, move your mouths. Thank you. On. Thank you. Welcome back. Who is brave that will tell us, the rest of us, what you or your partner said and why? No one. This is just like my 9th graders on the first day of school. They do exactly the same thing to me. Someone must be willing to say thank you and then thank you. Yes?
When I did that transaction, that the government, so we are kind of a country that's very used to good things happening by chance rather than merit or design.
Thank you for that comment. And I do think in a lot of places in the world, students are lucky they had a chance, that they're lucky they had that classroom and not this one in the same school. Or they went to that school but not that school. It saddens me that we still leave so much of our children's future up to chance. Someone else was going to talk? Come right over here. There was another volunteer. Yes, please.
Yes, but funnily enough, we sort of misunderstood what we had to do, but we still thought of what brought us here today.
Yes.
And what we said was commitment with education and through education, and the right to education and to be taught by a person who is great, but and by design. So.
Thank you. Commitment. And I appreciate your word great. My first year of teaching, I thought I was a great teacher. I hope those kids are okay. I was so not a great teacher. I don't even think I covered 50% of the content I was supposed to cover. My second year was very humbling, and I had to work really, really hard. I get frustrated that people say, you were born to be a great teacher. I don't think that's true. I think great teachers work very hard every year to get this much better. I aspire to be great. I hope you aspire to be great. I don't think I'm great yet. I'm working on it. I'm trying my best to provide my students the best I can. One more. I saw someone else over here who was going to talk. Yes, please.
Well, the 3 words that we came up with were challenge, learning, and improvement. So, because I think all of these elements relate to the teaching experience.
Thank you. Challenge, I appreciate that, because we're going to talk a little bit about challenge in a little bit, because I believe our students deserve a challenge, and I think they need to have amazing experiences that we designed for them and with them so that they can learn. I'll do a rapid review. I'm going to choose the word design for right now. I'll do a rapid review of John Hattie's work. For those of you who are not familiar, this white book, Visible Learning, is the best-selling book in the history of academic education publishing. There's no book that has ever sold more copies in the world than that book. He's an Australian, and he was, summarized the world's research in educational outcomes. His database now has 300 million kids in it. And to help all of us understand this database, he created a barometer of effect. And some things we do as educators have a harmful effect on students' learning. Some things we do as educators have what is called a developmental effect. No offense, but it had nothing to do with you. The student just got a year older. That's embarrassing. And then there's the average teacher effect. The average teacher around the world gets a half a year of learning for a year of school. And then there's the zone of desired effect, where the student learns a full year of content for a year of school. And that's where I want to work. I want to work in the zone of desire effect. I want to make sure the things I do are very likely to ensure my students learn a full year of content for a year of school. And some of my students need to learn more than a year. They need to learn a year and a half or a year and 8 months. And if 4 teachers in a row gave a kid a year and a half, we could start to close those achievement gaps. In this database, the effect size of 0.4 equals 1 year of learning. So anything that I show you that is above 0.4 will cause students to learn significantly. Here's the worst thing that happens in the learning life of students when they change schools in the middle of the year. Number one, worst thing. Now, I know none of your students move schools during the year. They all stay for the whole year. Is that right? You admit no new kids during the whole year, right? That's not true. What do you do when the new student arrives in your classroom or your school to make sure that kid is welcome and connected? Because if you don't, that kid is likely to lose a full year of learning. What the research on this says, if that new student says, I have a close personal friend within 3 weeks of enrolling in the new school, the impact of mobility is cut by 50%. Half, just from making sure kids feel safe and connected to other kids. Another 10% comes off if that same child says, there's an adult in this school who cares about me, that I trust, who advocates for me. And the rest of it comes off when you know where to start that school year, when that kid arrives, if you know what that kid's current performance is, what that other teacher was working on, and you don't have big gaps for several weeks in what was being taught, you can almost eliminate the impact of mobility. This is the one that I'm working on the most in my community, because if we could solve this problem, all the good teaching that we do has a chance of sticking with those kids. Here's one that I hope doesn't happen here, but it happens a lot in my country. When you fail first grade, when you are not promoted because you did not achieve at a certain level, we call that grade level retention. It has a harmful effect on students' learning and causes a significant portion of our dropout problem. When the minister was talking, he said 50% of the students don't make it out of school system. If we retain kids, we hold them back, we are increasing the likelihood that they will quit school. Putting students in a group based on how we perceive their ability, not going to change their achievement much. So if I'm with my group of kids in a small group in my classroom and they all have a reading score of 44 or whatever numbers you use, I'm probably not going to get good outcomes. But if I meet with a small group of students because I know what they need to learn, I'm going to get a way better outcome. Here's the difference. I'm meeting with a group of students because of a test score. I'm meeting with a group of students because I know what they need to learn still. Test scores do not show me what they need to learn. A 4 on a 9-point writing rubric or a 2.3 on a 5-point writing rubric don't tell me what the kid still needs to learn. That is not a good grouping strategy. We put students in small groups because we still know what they need to be taught. I like this one a lot. I don't think the world is paying enough attention to teaching students how to study. Is a very important skill that serves them very well if they go on to the university level. And we don't see a lot of study skills being taught. If you come to some of the other sessions I do while I'm here this weekend, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on study skills because I think it's really important that we reinvest in teaching students how to study. I love this one. Getting students to read things over again is really good for them. In fact, there's evidence that if they have to take a test, I don't know, maybe like a Cambridge or something like that. Have you heard of this test, the Cambridge test? Yeah. So there's evidence that on the reading passages, if students read passages a second or third time, their scores will go up. But students don't just suddenly start reading things again because it's a test. It's a habit that has to get developed over years. Do you have any students who hate to reread things? Yeah, I hear this all the time. So I've been thinking about this. Do any of you own your own 4-year-old? Do any of you have one? Have you ever had one? Did that little person love to reread the same book over and over and over and over to the point you wanted to shove a pencil in your eye? Don't make me read it, right? Parents send us children who love to reread, and we give them back children who hate to reread. Stop blaming the parents. That's on us. We must be doing something in those primary grade classrooms that makes students want to stop reading books again. So one of the things I noticed about the primary grade teachers, they often say to students during independent reading time, pick a different book. You already read that one. Imagine you are 5 years old and you love this person called teacher. And this teacher says to you 200 times, don't read that again. You already read that book. You're going to stop wanting to reread. Getting students to talk to each other in class doubles the speed of learning. We set a goal in my school district. That's an important word, goal. I did not say policy, regulation. I set a goal that 50% of the instructional minutes are student-to-student interaction using academic language, what we call the language of instruction. So if you are teaching in Spanish, the students should be producing Spanish. If you are teaching in English, they should be producing English with their peers for at least 50% of the minutes. I did not say 50% consecutive minutes. Do any of you teach 5-year-olds? Nobody teaches kindergartners. So it'd be super hard to have 2 hours of talk for kindergartners, right? They're not going to do it. So it might be 3 minutes of me, 3 minutes of you with a partner. Back to me, back to you, back to me, back to you. But we aim for 50% of the minutes, student-to-student interaction, using academic language, producing work. And if you look at our achievement, my school system is the #1 in the state of California. We didn't do anything else magic on the border between Mexico and California except get kids to talk to each other every day using academic language. Here's the highest number one effect on students' learning is called collective teacher efficacy. And it has 2 major parts. It's the best thing we know how to do. Number 1, a group of teachers come together and they talk about what students need to learn, how they will know if students have learned it, and what they will do if students don't learn it. Does that sound familiar to you? Like a professional learning community? That's half of this research. The other half is that group of teachers believes that those students can actually learn. And those teachers believe they have the power to get the students to learn. It's not just the process of a PLC, it's also the belief systems that we have as adults about our kids. John Hattie's database has 252 influences in it. It is too hard to review them all. So I've been thinking about how to share some things that could likely increase students' learning in significant ways. And I've been thinking about visiting classrooms, and when I visit a classroom, I look to see what the teacher is doing, I look to see what the students are doing, and I look to see the content or curriculum that they're learning. Those are the 3 things I pay attention to in a classroom. And I started thinking about what would happen if those circles started to overlap, more like Venn diagrams. So there's a place where the teacher and the students overlap, and that overlapping area I think of as a relationship. And student-teacher relationships are very powerful ways to get students to learn. I like to say it this way: young people don't learn from old people they don't like. If we don't have positive, healthy, growth-producing relationship with our students, nothing else we do is going to matter. It could be the best instruction ever, and if they don't like you, they're not learning from you. And some of you have colleagues who need to revise their relationships with their students. They need help in developing healthy, growth-producing relationships with students. I'm not saying we just fire those people, but I hope we can think about how to help them change their interaction patterns with their students. So I have a very short video that I hope highlights the value of student and teacher relationships.
1 minute, 1 minute, please. Time, thank you. Could you all please put down your pens and bring your papers to the front of the room? Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, you're too late. Gave you plenty of warnings about time. You failed. Sorry.
Excuse me, do you know who I am?
I have absolutely no idea.
Good.
Just think of what they can get away with if you don't even know their names. So a relationship to me starts when I know the student's name, I know how to pronounce their name, and I know something about them. Now, some of you have 20 kids or less, and some of you have 150 kids, depending on the grades you teach. Your job is to know their names. Your job is to know how to pronounce those names, and to know something about every one of the students you're lucky enough to teach. If you have that, you have the basis of a relationship. And I know it's hard. I started school this last Monday. I missed yesterday because I was traveling here. I co-teach with my colleague Nancy Fry, and I have index cards with the photograph of every student on one side and their name on the back. And I go through them over and over and over and over and over again, so that on the very first day of school, before they've even come, I can call them by name, almost all of them. Because I think it's so important that I know your name, and I know how you're going to say it, and I know something about you, because then we can start a relationship. The second area, I'm going to leave relationships there, and the second area is where the teacher overlaps with the content. And that overlapping area we call clarity or teacher clarity. And teacher clarity has a very strong influence on whether or not students learn things. And what I mean by teacher clarity is this, that the teachers know what the students need to learn. You have a sense of the expectations for the grade level or content that you're teaching. And number two, you tell the students what they need to learn today. It shouldn't be a secret. They shouldn't have to infer what they're learning today. We should tell them what they're learning today. Now, some of you are getting a little uncomfortable because you're into inquiry or project-based learning. I did not say you have to tell them what they're learning at the outset of the lesson. At some point in the learning, they should know what they were supposed to learn from this. And it can be in conversation. What did you learn? What did you learn? What did you learn? Or it can be, here's what I hope you learned today. But there has to be some point in the lesson where we talk about what was it that we learned, not just what we did. The third area of teacher clarity is that both the teachers and the students know what success looks like. What does it mean to have learned this? At what level do we need to learn it? Whether you use the Solo taxonomy, or the Webb's depth of knowledge, or the Bloom's taxonomy, whatever systems you use, do you know how deep the learning needed to be for those students? And did they know? So those are our three areas that we're trying to accomplish. Does the teacher know what students are learning? Does the teacher communicate that at some point? And do they all know what success looks like? That gives you that effect size that's very powerful. It's a very simple thing to change in a classroom. Do the students know what they're supposed to learn? And do they know what it means to have learned that? Now, a lot of people Focus on what they want their students to do, not what they want their students to learn. Today we're going to do this project. Today we're going to read this book. Today we're going to solve these problems. That's not what we want them to learn. That's what we want them to do. Learning is about learning, not the doing. I'm going to show you two very short video clips from the same school on the same day. This is a bilingual K-8 school. On the first video clip, these kids have no clue what they're learning. The second, they have a better sense. And I'm going to ask you to compare and contrast the impact this would have on students. The first video.
Why do you think that's important when you write, to have all these senses in there? Why does that help? I don't know. I think.
Really thought about it. Para aprender. We need to learn all the physical properties of matter. Because we're gonna have a science test. We're gonna have a test. We need to memorize. Really thought about it.
And who are you writing this to? Who's going to get that paper that you're writing? Do you actually share that writing with anybody, or you just put it in your folder?
We just leave it in here.
Oh, very good. Why is it important to learn the word colossal or any of these other words in Wordly Wise?
We expand our vocabulary.
So why is that important? So you have a big vocabulary. Who cares?
Because it'll help us out later in life to get a job.
To get a job? Thanks.
Really thought about it. It also will help you in the future, like to get AP classes in high school and stuff.
Ah, very good.
¿Estás aprendiendo esto por qué?
Why are you learning this? CSTs to get ready? If we get questions like this, to be ready to answer? Why do you think it's important to know about geometry? No idea? What do you imagine? What can you imagine?
Why do we learn that? Why is that important?
That made it easy.
Do you guys want to?
Really thought about it.
I like those last two girls. Maybe if we turn away, they'll go
Well, why
away.
do we learn simple?
Now, this is the same school on the same day. Different kids. And these kids have a better sense of what they're supposed to be learning.
Well, why do we learn similes? Why do you think?
To make your stories more entertaining.
Very good. So why do you think the teacher makes you do this? What's the point?
So we understand how to draw conclusions and stuff like that.
Entonces, ¿por qué es importante saber esto?
Para que sabemos cuáles son habilidades y cuáles son necesarias.
Do you think that's important to learn more vocabulary?
Well, it widens your vocabulary, and therefore widens your understanding of complex literature.
Not bad. No. We do main idea and details. What's the point of that? Why do you do that?
We do it because so we could know what main ideas are, what topics are.
Learning that because we need, we're scientists and we're trying to learn what
what the properties of an apple is and to figure out what you can describe it about.
Okay.
Because it describes the paragraph more and it takes out all the things that don't really care.
Very well said. And the last question. What do you?
Quiero preguntarles para qué.
I would like to ask you why it is important to know about tonic atone syllables. Because the guy says what, or how to stress the words, knowing syllables, how to separate a word into syllables. What are you doing? We do this in order to see how many syllables the word has, like sticky, split into words. How many syllables it has. What is important to know syllables? You need to know this to speak properly.
Getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. If you don't know what you're supposed to be learning, you're probably not going to learn it. If you can tell someone what you're supposed to be learning, you are 3 times more likely to actually learn it. That we call that low-hanging fruit. It is easy to change Monday. I was going to say tomorrow. It's easy to change Monday. We could make sure our students know what they're supposed to be learning. So could you spend a minute processing, turn to your partner, talk about what implications do you see in those 2 video clips? And do you need to resuscitate, it's like CPR? Do you need to resuscitate purpose in your classroom? Turn your heads. Your moves. Allow me to interrupt you. Welcome back. Thank you. So at that school that day, the principal and I collected those 2 videos, or we collected a lot of video, and we showed those 2 clips to the teachers, and we had a conversation at school about what we were doing as a faculty to ensure students learning at high levels. And by the end of that faculty meeting, we agreed to these 3 questions, which have now become our district questions. We want students to be able to answer these 3 questions every day, in every lesson. What am I learning today? Why am I learning this? And how will I know that I learned it? And if you were to get on the plane with me tomorrow night, 8:05 American Airlines, if you want to go, and you fly with me back to San Diego, and you go to school with me on Monday, I think you would be very hard to find a student who could not answer the first 2 questions. We are really good at these questions now. Our students can tell you what they're learning and the relevance behind it, why they're learning this. The 3rd question is still hard for us. Many students will answer how their teacher knows they learned it, not how they will know they learned it. We still have work to do on this final question. We want students to own that. How will I know that I learned it? Of course, my teacher probably has assessments as well, but how will I know that I've learned it? And if you are not a classroom teacher, if you visit other people's classrooms, stop walking in a room and asking a student, "What are you doing?" It drives their attention to the task in front of them. When you visit someone else's classroom, please say to students, "What are you learning?" Not "What are you doing?" We have to elevate education to learning outcomes, not doing outcomes. The 3rd area is where students overlap with the content they're supposed to be learning. And this overlapping area we think of as challenge or challenging tasks. I don't believe that our students will put themselves out there, struggle, risk failure and humiliation unless they trust the adult who is leading them and they know what they're supposed to be learning from it. Those first 2, for me, are prerequisites to get into challenging tasks. It's not enough just to say, I'm a rigorous, challenging teacher. If the students don't trust me, value me, and accept that learning, I cannot get them into challenging tasks. Those first 2 are super important. A good challenge also has a high effect on students' learning. Challenge is good for our learners, provided they trust the adult and they know what they're supposed to be learning from this challenging tasks. You've heard of the word rigor? Super popular, isn't it? Rigor, 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 rigor. Everybody likes to talk about rigor. We're a rigorous school. I'm a rigorous classroom. Most people don't have a definition of rigor. When you go back to school next week, get a group of teachers and give them a piece of paper and say, write down your definition of rigor. It'll be a big mess. No one has a good definition. We've worked really hard to try to figure out what we mean by rigor. And for us, the word rigor is a delicate, careful balance between difficulty and complexity. Difficulty is how much work, how much effort, how much time you're asking of the student. Whereas complexity is the kind of thinking, the number of steps in a process, the background knowledge required. I hope we don't make school rigorous just by pushing the difficulty button. We need to be thinking about complexity, not just difficulty. 9 more math problems, or wait, you say maths. 9 more maths problems. It's hard for me. 9 more of those problems do not automatically increase the complexity, but it certainly increases the difficulty. It's about strategically choosing those problems so you can choose to increase the complexity. 2 examples taken from a test that's given in the United States. I stole it from their website. Here's the first one. I enjoy watching you struggle with this translation. So if I gave this to students in grade 3, it will be more difficult than I give it to students in grade 10. But it is not a challenging assessment item. There's no challenge here. It's just going to be difficult for some students and less difficult for other students. If you are a native English speaker, would this be an easier question for you? Yes, right? Because we hear these words all the time. Try this one. I love this one. To watch you try to translate the numbers. Miles. How far is a mile? I would argue, you don't have to actually solve this, I would argue This problem is more complex, but not very difficult. If you can estimate and you understand ratios, and you can use process of elimination, you will get this answer correct even if you have no idea how far a mile is. Even if you have no idea what the numbers mean, you can think through it if you have those three processes. This is a more complex item, not a very difficult one. So as I was working on this difficulty complexity idea, I ran across an article, it was on the CNN news feed, and it said this guy named Mark is fascinated with the number pi. He holds the world's record for being able to recite pi longer than anyone else in the world. He recites pi at 15,314 digits. I run out at 3 digits. That's all I got, 3.14, that's over. He knows 15,314. And he got in the Guinness Book of World Records, and he got newspaper articles. And I would argue this is a difficult task, not a complex task. So I worry that the parents in your community celebrate when their children do difficult things, not complex things. And you need some parent education nights to teach parents to celebrate when their children do things that are complex, not just difficult. This is memorization. It is an impressive memorization task. The logical question is, why would you want to memorize this? But he did. It's just not very complex. Which then led me to think about how we could design learning tasks for students. And I put these grids together and I said to myself, there are some tasks we give students that are low difficulty, low complexity tasks. And when we first put this grid out, people were saying the low difficulty, low complexity is the bad quadrant. So I want to clarify that. Low difficulty, low complexity, we call the fluency quadrant. In the research world, that is called automaticity. In the popular press in psychology, it's called a habit. You have developed a habit, you own it. Our goal as teachers is to teach to the point where the things that students have learned become automatic for them. It is a fluent behavior. And some of the tasks we give them allow them to practice their fluency. But if we only give students tasks that allow them to practice fluency, they will never grow to higher levels. We have to balance the tasks we give students. Some of the tasks we give them are stamina-related tasks, perseverance, sticking to it. There's a New York Times best-selling book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. She wrote an entire book on that quadrant, how you help people stick to something to persevere and solve it. For a lot of your students, at-home reading is a stamina problem. They just don't take the time to do it. And if you come to the literacy session tonight, reading volume matters. How many total words you read a year is highly correlated to your overall achievement. We've known this for decades, but a whole bunch of our students are no longer reading at home. It's a stamina problem. And then when they take those tests, they don't have the stamina to make it through the test because they tire out, they give up. Some of the tasks we give students should be stamina tasks. A lot of students don't do research papers very well because they only do one a year. To move something from stamina to fluent behavior requires practice. You have to do it often enough to have a chance to move it from stamina to fluent behavior. If I go to the top, we call that strategic thinking. Consciously aware, purposeful thinking, where it's in your brain, in the front of your brain, it's not yet automatic. For example, setting goals is a conscious behavior. Problem solving is a conscious behavior. Making an inference for a lot of your students is a conscious behavior. Eventually, with some practice and feedback, It can move from a conscious behavior down to an automatic behavior. To move something from strategic thinking down to automatic behavior requires that teachers model and demonstrate, and that students get feedback when they try it, whereas stamina requires practice. The last area we call struggle. There's nothing wrong with allowing students to struggle. I argue they should struggle on a regular basis. Not all day. School cannot be pure struggle because they would quit. But there has to be times where they're grappling, thinking through some very complex kinds of things. And as our students struggle, we watch them to figure out what caused the struggle. Because the cause of that struggle can be tomorrow's lesson. But we let them struggle. I believe we are in an anti-struggle era in education. I believe if you said to your colleague, I gave my students this reading task and they really struggled with it, your colleague would say, you're a bad teacher. Probably not out loud, but in their brain. Because our current belief is, if you don't scaffold enough to guarantee success, you didn't do your job. And I hope we can get to the place where it's okay to let students struggle, where struggle is part of learning. And when we see what caused that struggle, we can design lessons to teach them so they don't struggle as much the next time. Lots of information on this little graphic. Maybe you could turn to your partner and talk about an assignment, a task, or an activity that you have given to students and where you think it fits in this. I've given you several like research papers, at-home reading, those kinds of things. Choose a task that you've given to students and talk about where you think it fits in these quadrants. Turn and talk. We have our students, we have our teachers, and we have the stuff they're supposed to be learning. And the way I think about engaging kids to make sure they really want to learn and do learn is to ensure we have really strong relationships, that we're clear on what we want them to learn, what it means to have learned it, and then we design the tasks to cause that learning. I think this is easy to accomplish. It's not some fancy $25,000 program. It's things we choose to do each day in our classrooms. We choose to be clear, we choose to develop relationships, and we choose to design learning tasks that close the gap between where our students are today and where they need to be. With that, thank you and enjoy the rest of your conference.